Okay, so welcome, Amy, to my podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. This is Amy Dempster. I've discovered her a few months ago, and I just really appreciate her work. So Amy is known as a earth keeper and a grid worker, and she works with the energy of the land, which really inspired me as I was kind of stumbling into it back with the healing circles during COVID. So Amy, do you want to give us a little summary about you, who you are?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me. I do a lot of work specifically with the spirits of the land and doing healing work with the land. And it's been quite the process for me over many years of really, initially just finding that nature was communicating with me spontaneously. And once I realized kind of what was happening and that I was receiving these messages, I really kind of set out on a journey to say, if they can talk to me, I can probably talk back to them. So how do I do that? And that really is what kind of began my journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like just finding Amy's group and her online course and her podcast was so affirming for me. I've always, if anyone knows me, they know I'm like a tree hugger, and and then I'll look at the trees and see faces in them and stuff like that. And that's what I love about your Facebook group, is that people are always posting pictures of cool nature and being like, do you see that too?
Yeah.
So I'm like, not alone. That's always like a thing for people on a spiritual journey, to know they're not alone. So the nature loving aspect and the connecting to the land aspect that you provide is just so awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you get from, I forget what you were doing in your regular 3D world before you woke up, but I remember that it was like abrupt, like a big change.
Yes. Yeah. I worked in hospitality. I was a hotel sales director for, I don't know, 15 years, and very much like worked in the city and, commuted downtown and did all that. And it really was kind of a process of, I, was feeling as the years were going by, like the walls were closing in and I just needed to be outside in nature. And I was finding myself taking myself for walks during the workday again and again and again. And there was a park across the street from the hotel, so I could walk around the park. And then there was a florist shop next door, and they had a lot of plants, and they were, so generous that they didn't care that I went in there and touched plants like 5 times a day. But it really was kind of in that time frame that I started having these really unusual interactions with hawks, the birds. And it wasn't like they hadn't been in my environment or that I hadn't seen hawks before, and they were just showing up. It was just that they were starting to be come really close to me, or behave in such a way that would very dramatically catch my attention. And so, once or twice was kind of like, that's odd, that's unusual, but it started happening over and over and over again in a short period of time. And that really made me start asking, like, what's going on here?
Right.
Is this a message that someone's trying to send me, or like, what's happening? And so that was the first part that really kind of made me start asking questions.
And that inspired your website name, right? Following Hawks.
Yeah, it was. Well, and it was a number of years later that I started that, because, over this process and a number of years, I really had a pretty deep message to move to where there were pine trees and water. And so in fairly short order, my husband and I ended up moving to Northwest Montana, where there is lots of pine trees and water. And it was shortly after that I would be out walking in my neighborhood and started receiving messages from trees. And again, it took me a little bit to be like, is this really happening? Am I really receiving this? Like, I'm definitely not going to tell anybody this is happening, because it's weird. And so as the months went by and that communication was kind of deepening, I did tell a few people. And one of my friends in particular really encouraged me, like, you have to write about this. You have to share about this. And I was like, I don't know if I want to tell other people, or people to Google my name and find this information out. And so I initially started a very anonymous Tumblr account, and so it needed a name, and I thought Following Hawks was a good name. So it started as a Tumblr that, once I decided to kind of put my name on it and
Right.
blog about my experiences more publicly turned into my website. So yeah.
That's awesome. I remember one time I was hanging out in my backyard. This was like new-ish on my spiritual journey, probably like 2010 or something. And there was a tree that we needed to remove. And I was apologizing to the tree, telling it,
Mhm.
I'm sorry that we have to take you down, but you're not, doing well and whatever. It was legit that we had to remove it. It wasn't just like
Mhm.
accessory, like, oh, we want more light in the backyard. And it responded and it replied to me, and it had a deep voice, and I heard like, it's okay, and it was, I forget even what I just remember being blown away that after I was like talking to the tree that it gave me an answer. I was like, oh my God. And I told my
Yeah.
husband and he just rolled his eyes. He didn't
Yeah.
believe me at all. And I'm like, what? And then at other times, we've had to, we had to remove a tree when we first moved to this house because it was like a storm came in. Like you could tell that like tree was rotten in the middle,
Mhm.
and my kids were upset about it, as was I. But they said, I think I told them like, oh, the tree said it's okay. And they're like, that's what they always say. And they were like it was like my kids were like, oh, they're so connected. And it was so sweet.
Mhm.
So it's just awesome. And I had another tree down the street tell me I'm not going to be around much longer. And then like a storm came and I was like, oh my God, that's the tree that told me it wasn't going to be around any longer.
It
Like,
knew. Yeah.
it's just so amazing to me. So to just speak this language with other people is like so awesome. So I love the work that you bring. And then, so what I was saying earlier when I was speaking with you before we were recording was how I ended up getting drawn to like the earth healing stuff, and with doing the healing circles for Reiki for all of the many weeks. I did it almost weekly from March of 2020 until just the beginning of May this year. Then I just got busy because so much other stuff has been happening that I just couldn't justify another night. But I was doing it regularly, and after a while, me and my other healer friends whoever joined in on the call, it was welcome. Like all Reiki healers or other kind of healers were, contributing to this list of people who wanted healing. But we would start seeing the earth light up during the healing. And we're like, I think we have to include the earth in this. And I would see the mountain, the tops of mountains. I don't know how loud my dog is right now. Hopefully she's not too loud.
I can't hear.
Okay, good. But we would see the mountaintops like light up, like almost like a burst of light kind of going down the mountain. And then we'd also be drawn to like the depths of the ocean. We would see whales, we would see elephants. We would also kind of project out and like send healing to the earth as if it was like a beach ball in front of us. And just these different things with the ley lines and the like the chakra points of the planet.
Mhm.
So just in my research to find, I think I might have even Googled ley lines. I mean, not Googled, like in the iTunes search for podcasts,
Oh, yes.
and maybe that's how I found the podcast that you were a guest on, and that's why I was like, oh my God, she speaks my language. So do you know anything about that the elephants and the whales being like ley line keepers? Have you heard of that?
Ooh, I don't think I've heard that specifically, but that it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, so many animal kingdoms, in particular, have a hand and a role in our collective ascension and our kind of awakening process on Earth. So yeah, that's really I love that. And
Yeah,
whales in particular with their with the frequencies, it wouldn't surprise me at all that they're using the energetic kind of grid lines of the earth for traveling, for navigation, for communication, and that type of thing. So yeah, that's
it's so
awesome.
cool. It is so cool. And then, listening to your podcasts and going through your course, there was a moment in, I think it was March, right after all the snow finally melted. And I went to me and my husband, we took lots of walks because what else were we doing? So
Uh-huh.
we were taking our typical walk, but we couldn't ever get to the one park because the snow was so high that we couldn't actually cut through the line. Oh my gosh, my dog is like clicking. But so we went to this park that was the first time we had been there since the snow. And I felt compelled to go to the center of, I mean, it's not even that big of a park. It's more like a rec park, it's just like a field, a basketball park, and
Yeah.
like a path around. It's not very big. But I was like, I feel like I want to go to the center and lay down. And he's like, well, you can if you want, but
I'll
I'm
be
not
over
gonna,
here.
exactly. So I was like, okay. So I went to the center, and I was like, oh, it's too wet. Like I reached, so I was like, I couldn't lay down because it was still cold and the ground was wet. But I put my hand at the center, and I swear it must have been the center, like the grid line center of this park. And when I put my hand down, I saw a blast of light like shoot down into the ground.
Love it.
And I was like, oh, you know, and of course I didn't say anything to him because he's not receptive to that. But I was like blown away, like, oh my gosh, the land wanted me to do that. So you explain how people are like acupuncture needles to earth. And like by being here in our physical body, we're helping like be a conduit for energy, and that the spirits of the land and our ancestors and other whatever, the history of the land is calling on us as physical human beings to shift the energy of a space. And I just love that so much. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I think what's happened in our culture over generations now is that, our role with the earth has really been removed just from our understanding and our knowledge. And so, we are an important part of the ecosystem. And so when we are removed from it, there's all kinds of things that aren't happening that we are needed for. So whether, the whales or the elephants are working with the good lines, like so are we. And so a lot of times that's the information that's coming through. And so really the way it's been explained to me, and I don't totally have a grasp of if it's like every human or if there's, certain people really with the kind of affinity or, whatnot for kind of doing this work. But a lot of what I understand is that, these energies that are coming in from the sun in particular, really strongly that are here to shift the frequency on Earth to, continue triggering our collective awakening. It oftentimes gets held in the mountains in particular, or, kind of some of these larger structures. And it almost needs a way to kind of like step down the frequency to be used. And so I'm shown a lot of times in journeys to say, put my hands on the mountain, let the energy flow through me and then down into the earth or kind of out into the grids, so that it's almost like it makes it usable energy, right? When it runs
not trapped.
So so we're helping to kind of almost take this raw energy and translate it into usable energy. And with so much of this work, right, like I always joke like, oh, I get my bag out and I put my crystals in and my notebook in and my
your bowl,
my bowl that I play, right, I have all my magical tools and I go out to the place that I'm guided to and I sit there and I'm like, now what? Nothing.
Right.
Like you just had to show up, or and you just had to put your hands on the ground, right? A lot of times sometimes there is more ceremony that's needed, or, kind of more things that are needed. But a lot of times it's really just the act of physically taking yourself somewhere, or sometimes not even going anywhere and just energetically tuning in to a place to do that work. And so it's oftentimes much, much simpler and sometimes less exciting than we imagine in our minds, or that we want it to be.
Right. Well, there was a stream by my house that I discovered. I mean, it's probably like a mile or so that I discovered during COVID with all the longer walks and everything. And there was one time where I like picked up a rock and like held it to my heart and was like, I just need to throw this rock into the stream, and just like sending my love into the stream. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but okay, and I threw it in. And then side note, like months later, I ended up moving my business to a space that happens to be right by that stream. And I had no idea.
I love it.
And my friends were saying, like, when we were doing our healings and stuff, they were like, Karen, the land is calling you. And I'm like, okay, and then they figured out that spot. I'm like, oh my God, the land really was calling me. Like
it was trying
something
to show
about
you
that spot. Yeah. So it was really awesome. And this summer I had an interesting turn of events with my vacation. I had planned, I felt like this draw to the mountains by the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but I figured it was something related to the things you teach about. And I was like, well, I'm just going with it. And I booked some house that was pretty. And then at the very last minute, it got canceled on us. And they said, oh, there's another one. And we had to kind of grab it or give up our vacation, So we took it, and it really was like outdated and ugly. I mean, it was beautiful in the 80s.
Not what you would have picked. Yeah.
No. But it was on a summit. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So it was like the same mountain that we would have been on, but we were on the freaking summit. So I was like, okay, I'm paying attention, you know?
This
And
has happened to me a few times in the past year where it's
oh,
like,
really?
so like I plan way ahead so that I have my lodging and I have whatever. And I always try and tune in and be like, is this where I'm supposed to be? And then it'll get canceled and it'll be like, well, we have this other spot, or you have to stay here. Or this is, you know, I'm like, all
Yeah,
right, just go with the flow wherever I'm supposed to be.
it's so neat. And then, yeah, so we ended up on this mountaintop, and then part of our plans for that trip was also like, we're going to go like tubing. And then on the way down to Virginia, we noticed signs for like Luray Caverns, which is like a big cavern.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, we should do that. Like, not even like consciously thinking about the
Going into
magnitude.
the
Yeah,
earth.
yeah. I'm like, oh my God. So then like all on the trip, I think right before we went to the tubing, I was like, oh, I should look up the history of this river. Cause like there were so many different rivers that we could have picked, but the one I ended up was the James River, which has to do with like the beginnings of America and 16,000 years of Native American use.
Right.
So it's like there's a lot of stuff there. So we were stuck on these tubes for way longer than we meant to be. So that was another fun little snafu. But I was just like floating along, because what else are you going to do but go with the flow? And I was like sending energy, and I was seeing things unlock. Like it almost looked like staples that were kind of coming undone. So I don't know what I was doing, but I knew I was doing something.
Yeah. Activating the energy. I mean, and that's,
Yeah.
if you've listened to any of my stories about, I keep working this this north-south corridor, kind of that goes from Montana through Utah down to Arizona. And I keep getting called onto it again and again and again, whether I realize it or not.
Yeah. It's layers and layers.
And really what they've showed me that it's just like the act of you kind of driving up and down this interstate, which the interstate's on the grid line, is activating the grid line. So again, it's like, you just have to be there.
Yeah.
And it happens.
It was so cool. So yeah, my last day of being at that vacation, because every time I would be walking with my husband. So this time I was like, let me just take the dog by myself. And I like walked and like found the highest part of the summit that I was nearest, and just kind of sat there and like held a rock and kind of like made an offering, like like I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, like I feel
but we
almost like
do we're just remembering.
yeah. So it's just like, and like me and Amy were talking before I recorded, but like I feel more comfortable one-on-one on the table with people than I do with the land stuff. Even though I like the land stuff, I'm less secure about it. So it's like, it's like, okay, I can still do something in this capacity, even if it's not my main focus.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And
I think all of us humans are being called to like reestablish that connection that's been lost for so long in our culture.
It's so crazy. And when I was looking through to see like my emails to you, like I saw an email I had sent you, I guess, when I first started taking the course, and it talked about the mountains in Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains. I had an experience there where I saw them undulating, and they, and with each undulation, I was hit with the blast of energy, and I was like, I don't know what's happening right now, but like I'm not hallucinating. I'm not overtired. I'm not on any drugs or alcohol. Like I was like just standing at a balcony, looking at the waves, like the undulation of the mountains, like in front of me. And it was really intense. So I'm not sure, they were feeding me some information, I guess, or some energy that I needed, but it is so cool.
Mountains are really magical. And again, they're holding so much of that energy. And I think, that happens to me sometimes too, where like my visual experience shifts and change, I'll suddenly be seeing like energy moving in a circle through trees or whatever. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's usually
more with your eyes closed, I would think, but sometimes it does
usually
happen.
with but the same thing where all of a sudden I'm just kind of like looking out, out my front door and going, oh wow, there's a big circle out there moving around, like I can actually see it, but it doesn't happen all the time. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's like the as these layers of kind of reality are unlocking to us, between 3D, 4D, 5D, it's like they're layered on top of each other. And so I think we're just being able to see a lot of what's been happening around us all the time in this reality, in this vibration that we haven't been able to before.
It's just so like mind blowing. So I know there's a massacre site not far from my house that I keep knowing I need to go to, but I haven't like followed through yet on that, because I'm like, oh, it's like Revolutionary War, something old and bad and heavy. So I'm sure there's something there I can do. Have you worked much with the East Coast?
A little bit, yeah, actually a fair amount in the last year. I've done a lot of property readings, and a lot of our kind of group readings that we do
Hmm.
for Earth Tenders Academy just keep going back, keep laughing. I'm like, gosh, here we are back in North Carolina again. Here we are
Right,
back in Virginia again. Like we kind of
right.
keep getting called back to that area. But yeah, it's really interesting to me. And I find in my experience, especially, doing these readings, is that, obviously the further east that you go in the United
Mhm.
States, the less kind of pre-settlement history there is, or the more of it that's been erased. And
Mhm.
so that's really what kind of um, pushed me to really create that module in particular in the Earth Tenders Academy, where it's like, go find what happened before settlement. Because in a lot of the, if I just would look something up after a property reading, like, what were those ancestors talking about, or what event occurred, and over and over again, I would just find the only information I could find on like the founding of towns along the East Coast were often like, and then the native tribes sold the land to the settlers. And you're like,
Right. That's as far as it
I
goes.
know that's not true. And I
Right,
know it's not that simple. And so,
right.
yeah, really kind of, wanting to engage people and asking those questions and saying, like, how was this area really settled? And, what was happening here? What were the creation stories of the people who were here? What were, what information am I missing from this big picture? Because when you do work with the land, those energies and those spirits are coming forward, and they're telling you, what's going on, or what their experience was, or how they were using the land. And if you have a better understanding of kind of what the history was, it's really helpful, especially, in the area that you live, to really be able to put that in perspective and have a bigger picture view of exactly what happened in that area where you live.
It's so neat. And you had an exercise in your class where you had you connect to your ancestor that worked with the land, like go
Mm-hmm.
as far back as you can. And
Yeah.
my mom is of like Norwegian descent. And I
Mm-hmm.
saw a Norwegian looking woman holding a basket. And I think there was a fish and there was something else. I can't remember now. I didn't know I was even going to mention that. I forgot, but that was deep. That's somewhere in my notes, from the
Mm-hmm.
class, but it was just so cool. And she was like showing me like, this is the food. This is what we did. It was just like a very like foundational, like living from the earth.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
she was proud. She was showing me something that she made. It was just so neat,
Yeah.
and I could tell it was like that Norwegian kind of feeling to
Yeah,
her.
and it's really, it's a struggle for modern people to kind of figure out where they fit and how they fit. And so being able to make that connection and go back to, you don't have to logically know, what
Right.
line is this, or what, when I do that, it's oftentimes uh Scandinavian ancestors for me
Oh, that
that
would be
that
it. That
come
would be
through.
it.
So
Scandinavian's
it
the
could,
word.
yeah, it
Yeah,
could be in
yeah,
that area.
yeah,
It's kind of
yeah.
hard to say because people were in different areas, but you really are. You're going back to ancient times. You're going back to, pre-Roman Empire, pre,
Mhm.
settlement in Europe, in that
Mhm.
case, if that's where you're from, and really kind of going back to find who were the people that lived with the land and in tune with the land, because we do have those connections, and we do have those energies who can step forward and work with us now. And we may no longer live where they lived, and so we may not be able to eat the things that they ate, or work with the same plants or herbs or flowers that they worked with, but we can at least have an understanding of how they worked with the land, how they interacted, and how they lived with the land. And then really kind of bring that to where we live now, which is also not, for most of us, our ancestral home, and really just kind of start over with the spirits in
Yeah.
that way, and kind of say, these are my earth honoring ancestors, and here am I, here I am, and how can I work with you now in this place where I now live? And in my experience, it's usually a very beautiful experience to have.
And that's so awesome. I really appreciate you like taking the time and talking to us. Oh, there was one more point. I just looked at my notes. I thought I
Yes.
covered it all, but the spirit guides thing. So that was one thing I think that you mentioned on the podcast where I discovered you, where you
Mhm.
talked about our spirit guides are just us in other forms and like dimensions or whatever. And I was like, oh, like I had just figured that out for myself personally over the summer I had last year during COVID and all that free time. I was doing like a shamanic journey at the base of a tree at this one park by my house by the stream. And I was brought to this Andean lifetime. I knew I was at the top. I knew it was Peru. I knew it was the Andes. Like I don't even know geography, you know, and I was just like, no, it's the Andes, you know, and it was like some shaman male who was me telling me like, you know, you're here now and I'm here to like share with you what I've learned and, you know, like I don't know, convene. It was just like a little bit
Mhm.
of a meeting.
Conference, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, what the hell? And even before that, I think I was having visitation from like a Knights of Templar kind of guy.
Oh
And
yes.
I was like, okay, you know, and then I think somewhere later I just kind of put it together and it's like, oh, they're all me. And then you said it in a podcast. And I was like, oh my God. So it's like, that's mind boggling. And I don't know that that's an absolute, like, I'm sure we have other guides that are from other things that are not all us, but is there anything about that you want to mention? Just because I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that.
I mean, it's been a fascinating kind of process for me too. And I think I was kind of starting to put those pieces together in the last few years of having experiences where I was, where I would experience something energetically here. Well, so there was a Stargate that was opened on my property and I was shown in the dream and that happened. And so then I asked a guide, where did that come from? And he was like, I don't know. You put it there. I'm like, I didn't put it there. I don't know what a Stargate is.
Right.
And really through that process, I started realizing, oh, it's like the other me that, put it
Right.
there, the version of me that knows that. So there were some things like that were kind of starting to filter through. And I was kind of starting to have those experiences. But then right at the beginning of 2020, I actually had been really sick before the whole world was sick. I got
Right.
really sick, kind of right at the beginning of that, and was really kind of tired and worn out, and was tuning into like the things that I had to do, or the different work, or I was looking back kind of through the energy work that I was doing, or kind of how I was doing it, and was reevaluating like, are there ways that I'm doing this energy work that's really tapping my energy that shouldn't be. And in that experience, I had this kind of group of spirits come forward and just say, well, you can just give it to us. Like, you don't have to do it all. You can just hand it over and we'll do it because it's easier for us to do it. And so it was kind of through that process that I started, I can't remember if they said, I think they might have even said, well, we're just you in a different dimension. And so it's easier for us to do. And so you're not even totally outsourcing it. You're outsourcing it to yourself in another, another dimension. And that like kind of blew my mind, where I was like, oh, okay. I really don't, like, I'm making it harder than it has to be, right? Like I'm taking all of this on, and really I can just give it to the version of myself that can do it really easily, without a physical body, as I have. And so that was really where kind of the pieces really started falling in, of like all of these energies that I'm interacting with, and these star beings, and these, like everybody who comes forward to me, even, Bigfoot I work with on a regular basis. And even Bigfoot, was just like, well, you're also a Bigfoot. I'm like, okay, that's weird, So it was over, a period of maybe a year or so where all of these messages started coming through. And it just makes so much more sense, honestly, when you kind of think about it like that. I'm like, oh, obviously my soul is much more vast than what can be contained, like just in this body, just in this lifetime. And so, the fragments of our soul that are all over kind of space and time are all working together. And so the messages that are coming through to me, are the things that I've learned somewhere else in existence, and, is coming through. And the things that I learn here, that kind of vibrates out to the other versions of me elsewhere. And so
and even like the voice in your head that might be unfriendly like I had things where I was healing another lifetime where she was still very strict Catholic and like
Mm-hmm.
shaming, you know, and my
Yep.
friend
Yep.
picked up on her. I wasn't even aware of her, but she was like sucking off of me a little bit. And it was like,
Yeah.
okay, you got to go now, you
Yeah.
know, like it's time for
Yeah.
you to evolve, you know, like,
Yeah. You have your chance over there. And you don't
yeah.
have to accept, and I think that's what it is like, it's not quite as conscious as we believe, right? Where I'm just like, hey, let me write a note to that version of myself, over there. But it's like packets of energy. And so I think of it in the way of just like, okay, if another piece of me learns a really valuable lesson that would be helpful to this version of me, that packet of energy can come to me, but I still have free will. So I can say, no, I'm not interested.
Right.
But I think a lot of times the way that kind of manifests for us is in ways where you're just like, I know I should be doing something right now, but I'm not going to do it. Or I
Right.
know, because you're getting that message. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's time to quit that job. You don't need to learn anything else from it now, or,
Right.
whatever. And the things we kind of drag our feet on is like, that's that packet of energy coming through to be like, you've already learned this lesson. Like it's done, move on.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's up to us then with our free will to make those decisions
Right.
and
Choose how to move
make those
forward.
changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope that we didn't like blow anybody's minds too
I
hard,
know,
but
right? It starts really making your mind spin.
but it's just so fun to spend some time in that space. So I appreciate you coming on so much. And I guess you let people know where they can find you and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so my website is followinghawks.com, just like the bird. And you can find all of the information about my podcast and my course, and everything is on there. There's also a free training for learning how to speak to the spirits of the land that you find right on my homepage. And you can find me on Instagram at Following Hawks. And my podcast is called The Earth Keepers, and you can find that pretty
Yeah.
much everywhere podcasts exist.
Yeah, I know. I'm like Earth Tenders Academy is the course and the class that she provides you with community. So I got my mug, my Earth Tenders mug,
Yes.
and then the Earth Keepers. So, but they're both amazing, and they're, everything's all interwoven, and it's just great. So I'm so glad having you here, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank
So,
you for having me. This was great.
all right, thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks.
Sure.